Spring, 1942, Washington, D.C. The war room smelled of cigarette smoke and desperation. Colonel Henry Aldrich Mitchell stood at the heavy oak table, 3 manila folders spread before him like accusations. Each folder bore the same stamp in red ink. Mission failure, casualties sustained. Mitchell was 45 years old, Deputy Director of Research and Development for the Office of Strategic Services, a position that existed because America had entered a new kind of war. A war where battles were fought in shadows, where victory often meant a man dying quietly in an occupied city, his death noticed by no one until morning. The folders told stories Mitchell had read too many times before. France, an OSS agent sent to eliminate a Gestapo officer coordinating deportations. The agent used the standard-issue Colt Woodsman pistol fitted with a Maxim silencer from the 1920s. He fired once. The suppressor muffled the muzzle blast, yes. But the mechanical action of the slide cycling backward made a sharp, metallic crack. The sound carried across the courtyard. German soldiers came running. The agent died in a hail of submachine gun fire 30 seconds later. Belgium. A team sent to snatch a scientist from a research facility. They needed to neutralize 2 guards at close range. Same weapon, same result. The first guard fell silently enough, but the ejecting brass hit the cobblestones with a ping that might as well have been a church bell. The second guard turned, shouted. The facility lit up like Times Square. The team extracted without the scientist. 3 weeks later, intelligence confirmed the scientist had been transferred to Berlin. Beyond reach, Norway. A sabotage mission against a heavy water production plant. The entry team needed to eliminate a roving patrol without alerting the garrison. The Colt Woodsman worked as designed, which meant it worked poorly. The suppressor reduced the sound, but not enough. Not nearly enough. The garrison woke. The saboteurs scattered into the winter darkness. The plant continued operating. The mission existed now only as a classified report gathering dust. 3 missions, 3 failures. All because American intelligence didn't have a weapon that could kill without making a sound. Mitchell closed the last folder. He looked up at the man standing across the table. Robert Thornton Davidson, director of the OSS, 50 years old, with the grey hair and hard eyes of a man who sent young Americans to die in places their families would never know about. Davidson spoke first. His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you lean in. "How many more, Henry?" Mitchell understood the question. How many more agents would die because they carried weapons designed for target shooting at country clubs, not for killing sentries in occupied cities? "Too many," Mitchell said. Davidson walked to the window. Outside, the Potomac River moved like molten lead under grey skies. Somewhere across the Atlantic, the real war was grinding forward. Tanks and bombers and artillery barrages that shook the earth. But Davidson and Mitchell fought a different war, one where silence mattered more than firepower. "The British have something," Davidson said. "A pistol called the Well-Rod, bolt action, fires .32 caliber ammunition. Their special operations executive uses it for close work. I'm told it's remarkably quiet." Mitchell had heard rumors the SOE guarded their weapons development like state secrets, which technically they were. "Have they offered to share the design?" Mitchell asked, though he already knew the answer. Davidson turned from the window. His expression said everything. "Churchill himself signed the order. No American access. They'll cooperate on operations, on intelligence sharing, on joint missions. But their weapons technology stays British." There it was. The solution existed, but it existed behind a wall of Allied politics and British pride. America would have to forge its own path. Mitchell felt something shift in his chest, not anger, something colder, something useful, determination. "Then we build our own," he said. Davidson studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "You have carte blanche, whatever you need, whoever you need. I'll handle the paperwork and the questions. You handle the science." Mitchell gathered the 3 folders. As he reached the door, Davidson spoke again. "Henry, our boys are dying because they're making noise in the dark. Fix that." Mitchell left without responding. There was nothing to say, only work to do. Summer descended on Connecticut with the weight of humid air and the distant thunder of industrial production. The war effort had transformed the American landscape. Factories that once made automobiles now made tanks. Textile mills now made parachutes. And in New Haven, the High Standard Manufacturing Company made pistols, target pistols specifically. The Model HD, a .22 caliber rimfire semi-automatic, favored by competitive shooters and military training programs. Precise, reliable, not designed for war, but perhaps capable of being adapted for it. Mitchell stood in the factory manager's office, watching through the window as workers assembled pistols on the production line below, hands moving with practiced efficiency, metal components becoming instruments of accuracy. Beside him, the factory manager, a man named Horace Wells, looked skeptical. "Colonel, we make sporting arms, match-grade target pistols for Olympic shooters and weekend enthusiasts. What you're describing, that's something else entirely." Mitchell didn't turn from the window. "I'm describing a modification to your existing platform, an integral suppressor, permanently attached. The weapon would function identically to your Model HD, but with the addition of a cylindrical housing around the barrel." Wells shifted his weight. "With all respect, sir, we don't know the first thing about suppressor design. That's specialized acoustics. Engineering we've never touched." "I know," Mitchell said. You'll provide the platform. Someone else will provide the science." Wells frowned. "Who? The Ordnance Department, the National Bureau of Standards?" Mitchell turned from the window. He looked at Wells directly. "Bell Telephone Laboratories." The silence that followed had texture. You could feel it pressing against your eardrums. Wells blinked. Once, twice. Then he laughed. Not mockery. Confusion. "The telephone company, Colonel, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Bell Labs makes telecommunications equipment, switchboards and transmission lines. They don't know anything about firearms." Mitchell had expected this reaction. He'd received it already from the Ordnance Department, from the military liaison officers, from his own staff. A telephone company solving a weapons problem. The idea seemed absurd until you understood what Bell Laboratories actually did. "Mr. Wells," Mitchell said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, "Bell Labs has spent 3 decades eliminating unwanted sound from telephone conversations. They've mapped the physics of acoustic transmission across thousands of miles of copper wire. They understand sound wave behavior, frequency dampening, and noise suppression better than any organization in the world." He paused. Let that sink in. The physics of making a telephone conversation clearer and making a gunshot quieter are identical. Different applications, same fundamental science. Wells stared at him. You could see the mental gears turning, the absurdity slowly transmuting into possibility. "You're serious?" "Completely." Wells walked to his desk, sat down heavily. He pulled out a pack of Lucky Strikes, lit one, took a long drag. The smoke curled toward the ceiling fan spinning lazily overhead. "If they can actually do what you're claiming," Wells said slowly, "if they can design a suppressor that works, truly works, we can modify the HD platform, extend the frame, integrate the suppressor housing. It won't be elegant, but it'll function." Mitchell felt the second shift. The same cold determination from the war room in Washington. The pieces were aligning. "Start the preliminary designs," he said. "I'll have the suppressor specifications to you by autumn." Our Bell Telephone Laboratories occupied a sprawling complex in New Jersey, the cutting edge of American telecommunications research. where the future of long-distance communication was being invented one experiment at a time. Mitchell arrived on a Tuesday morning in late July. The heat made the asphalt shimmer. Inside the main building, the air was cooler, filled with the quiet hum of scientific work being done by people who understood that progress happened in laboratories, not on battlefields. Though sometimes, Mitchell reflected, laboratories created what made victory on battlefields possible. Dr. Edmund Hartwell met him in Conference Room 3, 38 years old. Wire-rimmed glasses, the lean build of a man who forgot to eat when he was deep in a problem. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, a thin black tie, and the slightly distracted expression of someone whose mind operated on multiple levels simultaneously. They shook hands. Hartwell's grip was firm but brief, a man who didn't waste time on formalities. "Colonel Mitchell, I've read your preliminary brief, quite fascinating actually." Mitchell set his briefcase on the conference table. He extracted a portable recording device, the kind used for documenting field operations. "Before we discuss theory," Mitchell said, "I want you to hear something." He pressed play. The recording was from a training exercise, background noise of a shooting range, then the distinct sound of a Colt woodsman firing with a Maxim silencer attached. The muzzle blast was muffled, yes, but the mechanical cycling was sharp and clear, the slide moving backward, the spent casing ejecting, the return spring slamming everything back into battery. Snap, clack, snap. Mitchell stopped the recording. "That sound has gotten 3 of our agents killed in the last 4 months, probably more we don't know about yet." Hartwell leaned forward. His expression had changed. The distraction was gone. In its place, focus. "You need to eliminate the mechanical signature." "All of it," Mitchell confirmed. "The muzzle blast, the bullet's supersonic crack, and the mechanical action. Complete acoustic suppression." Hartwell stood. He walked to the chalkboard that covered one wall of the conference room. He picked up a piece of chalk, started writing. "Sound suppression requires addressing each source independently," he said, speaking as he wrote. "The muzzle blast comes from high-pressure propellant gases escaping the barrel at supersonic velocities. Solution, a chamber system that bleeds those gases before they exit, then cools and disperses them through staged baffles." He drew a quick schematic. "A barrel with ports along its length, a cylindrical housing surrounding it. The sonic crack is the bullet itself breaking the sound barrier. Solution, subsonic ammunition. Your point, 2-2, long rifle round already travels below the speed of sound, so that's solved." He tapped the chalk against the board. "The mechanical action is the challenge. Semi-automatic pistols function through recoil energy. The slide has to cycle to eject the spent casing and chamber the next round. That cycling creates noise, metal against metal, springs compressing and releasing." Mitchell watched Hartwell work, watched the pieces of the puzzle assembling in real time on the chalkboard. "The British well rod solves this with a bolt action," Hartwell continued. "Manual operation, no cycling, no mechanical noise, but that limits rate of fire and requires 2 hands. He turned from the board. His eyes met Mitchell's. "You want semi-automatic capability, which means we need a mechanism to lock the slide in place when maximum suppression is required." And there it was, the breakthrough, the innovation that would define the weapon. A slide lock, simple, elegant, revolutionary. "The operator could choose," Hartwell said, drawing the mechanism. "Slide unlocked for semi-automatic fire when speed matters. Slide locked for single-shot mode when silence is absolute priority. After each shot, manually cycle the slide. Slower, yes, but completely silent." Mitchell felt it again, that cold certainty, the knowledge that he was watching the moment when an idea became reality. "Can you build it?" he asked. Hartwell set down the chalk. He looked at the equations and schematics covering the board. 3 decades of acoustic engineering condensed into a weapons design. "I can design it," he said. "The suppressor itself will use a 2-chamber system. The first chamber contains zinc-plated bronze mesh wrapped around a ported barrel section. The mesh acts as a heat sink, absorbing thermal energy from the gases. The second chamber uses stacked baffles and bronze wire screens to further disperse and cool the gases before they reach the atmosphere. He paused. His mind was already 3 steps ahead, solving problems Mitchell couldn't even see yet. "There's something else," Hartwell said. "If we fill the second chamber with a dense liquid or gel before firing, we can achieve even greater suppression. Water would work, oil, even something as simple as shaving cream." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Shaving cream?" "The gel density allows it to absorb acoustic energy more efficiently than water. It's not permanent, it degrades with each shot, but for maximum suppression on critical operations, it could make the difference between detection and invisibility." The innovation born from telecommunications expertise applied to weapons design, a detail that would become standard OSS field procedure. Mitchell walked to the chalkboard. He studied the schematics. In his mind, he saw it already, the weapon taking shape, the solution to a problem that had killed good men. "How long?" he asked. "To finalize the design specifications? 6 weeks? Maybe 8? "You have 4. Hartwell didn't flinch. He simply nodded. Then I'll need access to high standards platform specifications immediately and a quiet place to work. No interruptions." Mitchell extended his hand again. This time, the handshake lasted longer, a partnership forged in urgency and possibility. "You'll have everything you need, Doctor, because what you're designing isn't just a weapon. It's the difference between our people coming home or dying in foreign streets because someone heard a sound that shouldn't have been there." Hartwell held his gaze. Behind the wire-rimmed glasses, something shifted. The academic becoming the patriot. The scientist understanding that his equations would translate into lives saved or lost. "I understand, Colonel, and I won't fail them." 6 weeks later, Mitchell returned to Bell Labs. September had brought cooler air and the first hints of autumn colors. But inside Conference Room 3, the season didn't matter. Only the work mattered. Hartwell looked thinner, more tired, but his eyes burned with the intensity of someone who had found the solution and refused to let it go until it was perfect. On the table between them sat a technical drawing, not a schematic now, a complete blueprint, every measurement precise, every component specified. The culmination of decades of acoustic research applied to a single purpose, making death silent. "The barrel is ported here, here, and here," Hartwell explained, pointing to the drawing. "Gases bleed into the first chamber before the bullet exits the muzzle. The bronze mesh wraps around this section. Temperature calculations show it can absorb sufficient thermal energy to prevent catastrophic gas expansion." His finger moved to the second chamber. "Baffles here create turbulence. The gases can't maintain directional velocity. They disperse, cool, slow down. By the time they reach the exit port, they're moving at subsonic speeds. No sharp report, just a soft exhalation." Mitchell studied the drawing. "And the slide lock mechanism?" Hartwell flipped to the second page, a detailed cross-section of the pistol's receiver. "A simple lever here. Engaged position locks the slide closed. Disengaged position allows normal semi-automatic operation. The operator chooses based on tactical requirements." He looked up at Mitchell. "With the slide locked and the second chamber filled with shaving cream, the dominant sound will be the bullet striking the target, not the weapon firing." Mitchell let that statement settle. The bullet striking the target would be louder than the gun firing it. That was power. That was invisibility. That was exactly what American intelligence needed. "What's the degradation rate?" Mitchell asked. "The bronze mesh will last approximately 200 to 250 rounds before thermal and chemical degradation reduces effectiveness below acceptable thresholds. The suppressor isn't field replaceable. The weapon would need to be returned for servicing." "Operational lifespan?" With proper maintenance, indefinite, the suppressor is integral to the weapon. They're one unit. Mitchell reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a single sheet of paper, a contract authorization, already signed by Robert Thornton Davidson, blank spaces where the contractor's name would go. He slid it across the table to Hartwell. Bell Telephone Laboratories is hereby contracted to provide detailed suppressor specifications to the Office of Strategic Services for integration into a classified weapons platform. Delivery required by October 1943. Hartwell read the document. He set it down, picked up a pen. Before he signed, he looked at Mitchell one last time. "Will it work, Colonel? Not the science. I know the science is sound, but out there, in the real world. And will it save the lives you're hoping it will?" Mitchell thought of the 3 folders, the mission failures, the agents who died making noise in the darkness. "Yes," he said, "it will." Hartwell signed. The weapon that would change covert warfare had just moved from theory to production. December 1943. New Haven, Connecticut. The first production run came off the line on a Tuesday morning when frost still clung to the factory windows. Mitchell stood in the classified assembly area, watching workers fit integral suppressors to high-standard frames. Each movement practiced, each weapon hand-inspected before being approved for delivery. Code designation on the shipping manifests, impact testing machines. Nobody asked what was being tested. In wartime, you learned not to ask questions when armed guards stood at the doors. The assembly process fascinated Mitchell. Each pistol started as a standard Model HD frame. Then the modification began. Workers installed the ported barrel, fitted the zinc-plated bronze mesh around the barrel section, attached the 2-chamber suppressor housing, tested the slide lock mechanism, verified the magazine fit, 47 ounces unloaded, 13.8 inches overall length, matte black finish. Each weapon received a serial number, HDM-0001 through HDM-2600, High Standard Model D, the designation that would become legend in intelligence circles. Horace Wells approached Mitchell on the factory floor. The skepticism from their first meeting had vanished, replaced by something like pride. "We're on schedule for full delivery by March," Wells said. 2,600 units. Quality control has been rigorous. Every weapon test fired, every suppressor verified. Mitchell picked up one of the completed pistols. The weight felt right, the balance perfect. Dr. Hartwell's acoustic science transformed into cold steel reality. "The Ordnance Department still doesn't believe this will work," Wells said quietly. "They think we're wasting resources on a telecommunications company's pipe dream." Mitchell didn't respond immediately. He sighted down the barrel, worked the slide lock mechanism, smooth, precise. "The Ordnance Department will believe it when the field reports come back," he said. "Until then, we keep working." The weapons moved through a distribution network that existed only in classified documents. Mitchell personally oversaw the logistics. Crates marked impact testing machines loaded onto trucks. Trains, ships crossing the Atlantic. European theatre received the first shipments. OSS field stations in London, Algiers, Cairo. Limited numbers went to British SOE through back-channel agreements that officially didn't exist. French resistance networks would receive them through Allied supply drops. Each weapon came with a thin manual, instructions typed on onion skin paper. Loading procedure, slide lock engagement, chamber filling technique. Effective range, 50 feet or closer. Ammunition, .22, long rifle subsonic only. Maintenance schedule, suppressor replacement after 200 to 250 rounds. And a final note, added by Mitchell himself. "This weapon saves lives by taking them silently. Use it with the understanding that your survival depends on its silence." January 1944. Area B, Maryland. The training facility occupied remote woodland in the Maryland countryside, heavily guarded, the kind of place that didn't appear on maps. Official designation, Area B, the facility that would later become Camp David, but the agents training there called it something else. The House of Horrors. The building had been constructed to simulate urban combat environments. Narrow hallways like European apartment buildings, rooms with furniture and shadows. Pop-up targets that appeared without warning, all of it designed to prepare agents for the reality of close-quarters killing. Mitchell arrived on a morning when snow dusted the trees. He walked through the facility with Colonel Rex Thompson, the chief instructor. Thompson was 52 years old, former Shanghai police officer who had trained British commandos before joining OSS. He understood violence in a way that couldn't be taught from textbooks. The HDM requires different training protocols than conventional pistols, Thompson explained as they walked. Standard marksmanship, sight alignment, trigger control, precise aimed fire. That doesn't apply here. They entered the main training building. Inside, a dozen agents stood at firing positions. Young men, a few women, all volunteers for work that would never be acknowledged publicly. Thompson demonstrated with an HDM. He raised the weapon without sighting, pointed it like an extended finger, fired 3 times in rapid succession. 3 targets, 3 hits, center mass on each. The sound was barely audible, a soft, mechanical sigh. The loudest noise came from the bullets striking the paper targets. "Point shooting," Thompson said, his voice carrying across the range. "You extend the weapon as an extension of your arm. You look at the target, not the sights. Your body knows where the barrel is pointing. Trust that instinct." He engaged the slide lock, manually cycled the weapon, fired again. This time, the sound was even quieter, a whisper of mechanical action, nothing more. "Slide locked mode," Thompson continued. "For situations where absolute silence is required, sentry elimination, guard dog neutralization, any scenario where a single shot needs to be undetectable, you sacrifice rate of fire for complete acoustic suppression." He held up a can of Barbasol shaving cream. "Dr. Hartwell's innovation. Fill the second chamber before critical operations. The gel absorbs acoustic energy better than water or oil, makes the weapon as close to silent as physics allows." The agents watched with the intensity of people who understood that this training might be the difference between coming home or dying in a foreign street. Mitchell observed the drills, agents moving through the House of Horrors, pop-up targets appearing in doorways behind furniture in shadows, the HDM coughing softly, targets falling, agents moving forward. One young agent, couldn't have been more than 23, completed the course in under 2 minutes. 6 targets, 6 shots, perfect silence. When he emerged, his hands were steady, but his eyes carried the weight of what he'd just learned to do. Thompson approached him. "Name?" "Harper, sir, Lieutenant James Harper." "You'll be deployed to France within the month. Jedburgh team. This weapon will keep you alive if you remember what you learned here. 50 feet or closer. Point shooting. Trust the slide lock when it matters most." Harper nodded. Mitchell saw it in the young man's face, the understanding that this wasn't training anymore. This was preparation for killing that would happen in darkness, in occupied cities, where noise meant death. By the end of January, 200 agents had completed HDM training. By February, that number doubled. The pistols were deploying to every theater where OSS operated. And then the reports started coming back. March 1944. OSS Headquarters, Washington. The letter arrived through classified channels, a thin envelope marked with codes that indicated British SOE origin. Mitchell opened it in his office, alone. The sender was E.A. Sykes, a coordinator working with Jedburgh teams, the 3-man units parachuting into occupied France to work with resistance networks. The letter was brief, direct. "Colonel Mitchell, request additional supply of suppressed pistols. Initial distribution of 122 units to Jedburgh teams has proven highly effective. Field reports indicate mission success rates improved significantly. Sentry elimination operations completed without detection. Document retrieval missions achieving objectives that previously failed due to acoustic compromise. French resistance networks requesting access to weapons. British SOE concurs this. Represents optimal tool for current operational requirements. Recommend immediate shipment of additional 200 units to London Distribution Centre. E. A. Sykes. Mitchell read the letter 3 times, then he filed it in a folder that was already growing thick with similar reports. Belgium, a team sent to extract a scientist from a research facility. Previous attempt had failed due to noise alerting guards. Second attempt with HDM weapons, mission success. Scientist extracted, no casualties, Norway. Sabotage operation against industrial target. Guards eliminated silently. Demolition charges placed. Team extracted before alarm raised. Target destroyed. France. Multiple reports from Jedburgh teams, sentry eliminations, ambush operations, prisoner snatches. The pattern was consistent. Missions that previously failed due to acoustic detection were now succeeding. The weapon was doing exactly what Mitchell had promised, saving lives by enabling silent operations, but the reports told only part of the story. Between the lines, Mitchell read what wasn't written, the fear that agents no longer carried, the confidence that came from knowing their weapon wouldn't betray their position, the psychological edge of operating with tools that worked. Davidson entered Mitchell's office without knocking. He held a folder similar to Mitchell's. "The field reports are remarkable," Davidson said. "Mission success rates in covert operations have increased by 37% since HDM deployment." "Statistics," Mitchell said quietly. "They don't capture what it actually means." "No, they don't." Davidson sat down. He looked older. The war was aging all of them. "But they tell us the weapon works, that you were right about Bell Labs, about Hartwell, about all of it." Mitchell thought about the 3 folders that had started this journey, the mission failures, the agents who had died because their weapons made noise at the wrong moment. "How many lives saved?" he asked. "That's the only statistic that matters." "We'll never know the exact number," Davidson said. "The operations are classified. The missions happen in darkness, but every agent who completes an operation and comes home, that's 1 life saved. Multiply that across every theater, every mission, every night when someone needed absolute silence." He paused. "Henry, you've changed how we fight this war. The enemy knows we have suppressed weapons now. The British have made sure of that with their well rod, but they don't know where ours are, don't know which agents carry them. Every German sentry on every night shift in every occupied city is now wondering if that sound they heard was a weapon or just the wind." Mitchell didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The weapon existed, it worked. Agents were coming home. That was enough. But there was one more test, one more demonstration that would prove the weapon's worth to the person whose approval mattered most, the President of the United States. November 1944, the White House. The prototype arrived in a leather case lined with green felt. Mitchell carried it himself from the OSS headquarters on E Street. No courier, no subordinate. Some things were too important to delegate. HDM-001, the first weapon off the production line, now 11 months old. Tested in training, proven in the field, ready for the demonstration that would validate everything. Mitchell stood in the West Wing corridor, the case resting against his leg. Through the walls he could hear the muffled rhythm of the executive branch conducting war. Secretaries typing, phones ringing, the machinery of global conflict operating at the speed of paper and ink. Robert Thornton Davidson emerged from a side office. He looked at Mitchell, nodded once. "He's ready?" They walked through corridors where history happened quietly, past portraits of dead presidents whose wars had been fought with cannons and cavalry. Those men would not have understood what Mitchell carried, a weapon designed not to announce death, but to deny it had occurred at all. The door to the Oval Office stood open. President Franklin Wheeler sat behind the resolute desk, dictating correspondence to his personal secretary, Margaret Ashford. She typed with the mechanical precision of someone who had served 3 administrations. Wheeler was 62, grey hair receding, reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked like what he was, a man carrying the weight of a global war on shoulders that had already borne the Great Depression. He glanced up as Mitchell and Davidson entered, made a small gesture. "Wait." Margaret's fingers continued their dance across the typewriter keys. Wheeler's voice rolled on, measured and precise, and conveyed to General Marshall my complete confidence in his judgment regarding the Italian campaign. The decisions made in the field must reflect the realities on the ground, not the preferences of armchair strategists in Washington. Signed, etc. Margaret pulled the letter from the typewriter. "I'll have this ready for signature within the hour, Mr. President." "Thank you, Margaret. That will be all." She gathered her materials and left. The door closed with a soft click. Wheeler removed his reading glasses, folded them, set them on the desk with the careful precision of a man who had learned that small routines created order in chaos. "Director Davidson, Colonel Mitchell, I understand you've brought me something that will either impress me greatly or waste 20 minutes I don't have." Davidson stepped forward. "Mr. President, what we're about to demonstrate represents a breakthrough in covert operations capability. But the demonstration requires your complete attention and, most importantly, your silence during the test." Wheeler's eyebrow raised. "My silence?" "Yes, sir. We need you to continue working, reading, writing, anything that would occupy you in a normal setting. Don't react to what happens behind you." The president looked between them. You could see him calculating, weighing. Then he reached for a document from the stack on his desk. "Very well, I have budget appropriations to review. Tedious work, but necessary. Proceed with whatever you're planning." Davidson moved to stand directly behind the president's chair, 3 feet of space, close enough to reach out and touch the president's shoulder. Mitchell handed him the HDM. Davidson checked the chamber, verified the magazine, 10 rounds of .22 long rifle subsonic ammunition, drew back the slide manually, let it snap forward, a round, chambered with a metallic click that seemed loud in the quiet office. He engaged the slide lock, the mechanism that made this weapon different from every other semi-automatic pistol in the world. Davidson raised the weapon, pointed it at the far wall, away from anything that mattered. The barrel aligned with a section of wall between 2 windows, heavy curtains, dense plaster, nothing that would cause dangerous ricochets. President Wheeler turned a page. His pen scratched notes in the margin. Davidson fired. Davidson. The HDM produced a sound like a book closing in a library. A soft, mechanical sigh. The bullet struck the plaster with a dull thump, and that impact was louder than the shot itself. Wheeler's pen continued moving. Davidson manually cycled the slide, ejected the spent casing into his palm, chambered the next round, fired again. Another soft exhalation, another impact. 10 rounds total. 10 barely audible coughs of sound that wouldn't carry beyond the office walls. Wheeler set down his pen, turned in his chair. His expression cycled through confusion, comprehension, and something close to wonder. "Director Davidson, did you just discharge a firearm in the Oval Office?" "Yes, Mr. President. 10 rounds. Wheeler stood, walked to where Davidson indicated, examined the wall. 10 neat holes punched through the plaster in a tight grouping. He turned back to them. "I heard something. I thought—" He paused. A slight smile crossed his face. The first genuine expression Mitchell had seen from him. I thought it was the telephone dropping in Henry Wallace's office next door. The vice president has clumsy secretaries. There it was. The moment of validation that justified 11 months of development and countless hours of acoustic engineering. If the President of the United States, sitting 3 feet away, couldn't distinguish gunfire from a dropped telephone, then the weapon had achieved something unprecedented. Wheeler extended his hand. "May I?" Davidson handed him the HDM. Wheeler examined it with the careful attention of a man who understood that details mattered. He tested the weight, sighted along the barrel, worked the slide-lock mechanism. Bell Telephone Laboratories designed the suppressor, Mitchell explained. They applied telecommunications acoustic principles to weapons development. The result is the quietest semi-automatic pistol ever produced. Wheeler looked at him. "How many of these do we have?" "Currently 2,600 units in production and deployed across all theaters." "How many lives has it saved?" The question Mitchell had been asked before. The question he still couldn't answer with numbers. "Every agent who used it and came home, Mr. President. Every mission that succeeded because no one heard a sound that would have brought the enemy running. I can't give you a number, but I can tell you that the agents we were losing because our weapons were inadequate, those deaths have stopped." Wheeler handed the weapon back to Davidson. He walked to the window. Outside, the November afternoon was fading into dusk. Somewhere across the Atlantic and the Pacific, American forces were fighting and dying. "Gentlemen," Wheeler said, his back to them, "I want regular reports on field performance, not through channels, directly to me. If this weapon is saving American lives, I want to know. If it's failing, I want to know that too." "Yes, Mr. President." They left the Oval Office with the validation they needed. Behind them, President Wheeler returned to his desk, his budget appropriations, his war. The 10 bullet holes in the wall would be plastered over by morning. The only evidence would be a classified maintenance report buried in White House records, but the weapon was real, proven, effective, and the war would soon know just how effective. 8 days later, everything nearly fell apart. November the 12th, 1944. Mitchell's morning began with a phone call that made his blood run cold. "Colonel, you need to see today's Philadelphia Inquirer, page 3. Mitchell obtained a copy within the hour. Page 3, a photograph that should never have existed. Admiral Harrison Whitfield in full uniform, his son, Lieutenant David Whitfield, standing beside him, both men smiling. The Admiral holding an HDM in proper shooting stance. The caption, "Admiral Whitfield tests new silent pistol in Hawaii." Mitchell stared at the photograph for 30 seconds, felt his jaw tighten, forced himself to breathe evenly. The classified weapon had just become public knowledge. The story unfolded quickly. Admiral Whitfield had received an HDM as a gift from Davidson, a gesture of professional respect for the Admiral's support of OSS operations in the Pacific. Whitfield, delighted, had shown it to his son. They took it to a range in the hills above Pearl Harbor. A Navy photographer documented the moment. Standard military photography. Lieutenant Whitfield, proud of his father, sent a copy to his mother in Philadelphia. She showed neighbors. One neighbor worked for the Inquirer. And now the weapon that had been developed in absolute secrecy was on page 3 of a civilian newspaper. The Congressional inquiry happened within 48 hours. Mitchell sat in a hearing room that smelled of old wood and older politics. Congressmen who had never heard a shot fired in anger, demanding to know why a classified weapons program had been compromised. Mitchell kept his answers precise. Clinical, yes, the weapon existed. Yes, it was classified. Yes, the photograph represented a security breach. No, the breach had not come from OSS personnel. Yes, steps were being taken to prevent future incidents. The questions came like artillery. How much did it cost? How many existed? What operations had employed it? Were American agents conducting assassinations with suppressed weapons? Mitchell answered what he could. deflected what he couldn't, and then in a moment of clarity, he saw the opportunity hidden in the disaster. During his testimony, Mitchell made a statement that would be quoted in intelligence briefings for years afterward. "Gentlemen, our adversaries now know we possess silent weapons. But they don't know where those weapons are. They don't know which agents carry them. They don't know which operations employ them. Every German guard on every night shift in every occupied city is now wondering if the sound he just heard was a weapon firing or a door closing. That uncertainty, that fear, that's a weapon too." The room fell silent. One congressman, a former army officer who understood psychological warfare, leaned back in his chair. "Are you saying, Colonel, that this security breach might actually benefit our operations?" "I'm saying, sir, that the enemy now knows we can kill silently, but they can't prevent it because they can't hear it coming. In some ways, that knowledge makes them more vulnerable, not less." The inquiry ended with a reprimand filed somewhere in the bureaucratic maze. The photograph became a curious footnote in wartime news coverage. Most readers assumed it was propaganda, a fictional weapon designed to intimidate the enemy, which, Mitchell reflected later, made the security breach almost useful. The weapon was real, the enemy knew it existed, but they couldn't stop it because they couldn't hear it coming. By the time the war ended in 1945, 2,600 HDM pistols had been distributed across every theatre of operations. 410 had been expended or destroyed in operations. The remaining weapons transferred to storage as the OSS prepared to dissolve. Mission success rates in covert operations had increased by 37%, but statistics couldn't capture what the weapon had actually meant. The agents who came home, the intelligence gathered, the war shortened by operations that succeeded in silence. Mitchell kept all the field reports in a locked filing cabinet. He never showed them to anyone. They were classified. But more than that, they were personal. Each report represented lives saved, missions completed, Americans who survived because someone at Bell Labs understood how sound worked. The HDM had become exactly what Mitchell promised it would be. A weapon that won through silence. The war ended twice. August 1945 in the Pacific. May 1945 in Europe. The world exhaled, soldiers came home, factories stopped making weapons and started making automobiles again. The machinery of war ground to a halt, except in the shadows. September 1947. President Harry Truman signed the National Security Act. The Office of Strategic Services dissolved. In its place, the Central Intelligence Agency, new name, same mission, the war that never ended, fought by people whose names would never appear in history books. Colonel Henry Aldrich Mitchell sat in his office on the day the OSS officially ceased to exist. He was 50 years old now, 5 years older than when he'd started this journey with 3 manila folders and a problem nobody knew how to solve. On his desk, an inventory list, assets transferring to CIA control, line item 47, high standard HDM pistols suppressed, quantity 2,190 units, 410 units expended/destroyed in operations. 2,190 silent weapons moving from one intelligence agency to another, the continuity of shadows. Mitchell signed the transfer authorization, his last official act as an OSS officer. Robert Thornton Davidson appeared in the doorway. He looked older too. The war had aged them both in ways that couldn't be measured in years alone. "Henry, walk with me." They left the building together. Outside, Washington was golden with autumn light, leaves turning, the Potomac reflecting the sky like polished steel. "You're not coming to the agency," Davidson said. Not a question, a statement. "No," Mitchell confirmed. I've done what I came to do. The weapon works. The mission continues. Time for younger men to carry it forward." They walked in silence for a moment. Two men who had shared the burden of sending Americans into darkness armed with weapons they had created. "The HDM changed covert operations," Davidson said quietly. "You know that, don't you? We can measure it in mission success rates, in agents who came home, in intelligence gathered, but the real change was psychological. Our people stopped being afraid of making noise. That fear had been killing them. You removed it." Mitchell didn't respond immediately. He thought about Dr. Edmund Hartwell and his acoustic equations, about the workers at High Standard assembling weapons they couldn't discuss, about agents in occupied Europe who had trusted their lives to 14 inches of steel and science. "The weapon was never the point," Mitchell said finally. "The point was the men and women carrying it. I just gave them a tool that let them do impossible work." Davidson stopped walking, extended his hand. "The agency will keep your weapon in service as long as it remains effective. You have my word." They shook hands, a final parting between two men who had fought a war most people would never know happened. Mitchell retired to a small house in Virginia. He consulted occasionally for the CIA. Technical matters, weapons assessments, but mostly he tended his garden and tried not to think about how many people had died because of something he had created, or how many had lived. June 1950. North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel. The Korean War began, though it was never officially called a war. A police action, a conflict. Words politicians used when they didn't want to admit what was actually happening. The CIA deployed paramilitary teams along the demilitarized zone, intelligence gathering, sabotage. The same shadow work that had happened in Europe, now transplanted to frozen hills and rice paddies. The teams carried HDM pistols, 7 years old now, still effective, still silent. Mitchell received reports through his consulting contract. The weapon was performing exactly as designed. The bronze mesh was degrading on schedule. Suppressors were being replaced at the 200-round mark. The science held, the engineering held, the weapon held. The war ended without ending. A permanent armistice, a frozen conflict that would outlive everyone who had started it. May 1st, 1960, Soviet airspace. Captain Nathaniel Brennan flew at 70,000 feet in a U-2 reconnaissance aircraft. 33 years old, one of the most skilled pilots in the CIA's secret aviation program. His mission: photograph Soviet military installations near Sverdlovsk. In his survival pack, one HDM pistol, serial number HDM-1847, loaded magazine, 17 years old and still functional. The SA-2 surface-to-air missile struck his aircraft at 8:53 a.m. local time. Brennan ejected, parachuted into Soviet territory, was captured within 2 hours. The Soviets found the HDM. They understood immediately what they had. The show trial happened in Moscow, August 1960. The world watched as Captain Brennan stood accused of espionage. The evidence was displayed on tables for cameras and foreign press. Among the items, the high-standard HDM pistol. Soviet prosecutors called it an assassination weapon, evidence of American plans to murder Soviet officials and scientists. They claimed 47 unexplained deaths of Soviet personnel between 1945 and 1960, all potentially attributable to suppressed American weapons. The CIA neither confirmed nor denied. The truth disappeared into classifications that would remain sealed for decades. Mitchell watched the trial on television from his Virginia living room. He was 63 years old. The weapon he had authorized for production 17 years earlier was now being displayed as proof of American perfidy. He felt nothing, not guilt, not pride, just the cold acceptance that weapons designed for shadows eventually found their way into light. Brennan was exchanged for a Soviet spy in February 1962. He came home, wrote a memoir that carefully avoided any mention of the HDM's actual capabilities. The pistol remained in Moscow, displayed at the Central Armed Forces Museum, a trophy, evidence of American covert capability frozen behind glass. 1967. Frankfurt Arsenal. Mitchell received a phone call in March, a voice he didn't recognize, young, eager, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who had never seen their designs used in actual operations. Colonel Mitchell, my name is Captain Robert Foster. I'm heading up a project at Frankfurt Arsenal to modernize the HDM suppressor. We've developed what we believe is a significant improvement over the 1943 Bell Labs design. We'd like your input before we move to field testing. Mitchell felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd seen this before. The military's obsession with making things newer without asking if newer meant better. Send me the specifications, he said. The documents arrived 3 days later. Mitchell spread them across his dining room table. He studied them for an hour. Then he picked up the phone. Captain Foster, your design is heavier, more complex, and based on my calculations, less efficient than the original. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, sir, with respect, our engineering team believes the additional baffles and the redesigned mesh configuration will improve suppression by 12 to 15%. Your engineering team is wrong. The additional baffles will create back pressure that reduces muzzle velocity. The redesigned mesh has less surface area for thermal absorption. You're solving problems that don't exist while creating new ones. Colonel, we appreciate your historical contribution, but suppressor technology has advanced considerably since 1943. Then test it, Mitchell interrupted. Put your design in the field, compare it directly to the original, let the operators decide. Foster's tone cooled. We intend to, sir. 6 months later, the results came back. Field testing disaster. The Frankfurt Arsenal suppressor was heavier, louder. The mesh degraded faster. Operators refused to adopt it. In every measurable category, the 24-year-old Bell Labs design outperformed the modern replacement. Mitchell received the report through his CIA contact. He read it once, filed it away. He didn't feel vindicated, he felt tired. Sometimes the first solution was the only solution needed. Sometimes you couldn't improve on the work of a telecommunications engineer who had understood that sound was sound, regardless of whether it traveled through copper wire or gun barrel. Dr. Edmund Hartwell had died in 1963. Heart attack at his desk, working on telephone system improvements until the end. Mitchell had attended the funeral, had stood in the rain, and thought about how the man's greatest achievement would remain classified for decades. The Frankfurt Arsenal quietly discontinued their replacement program. The HDM remained in CIA inventory, original suppressor intact. 1982. Détente. Relations between America and the Soviet Union had thawed slightly. Cultural exchanges, scientific cooperation, small gestures that pretended the Cold War might someday end. Mitchell received an invitation, unofficial, delivered through channels that technically didn't exist. The Soviet government was hosting a delegation of retired American military officers, a goodwill tour, museums, historical sites. Mitchell was 85 years old now. His hands shook slightly when he held paper. His knees protested stares, but his mind remained sharp. He accepted the invitation. The delegation visited Moscow in November. Cold already, snow threatening. Mitchell stood in the Central Armed Forces Museum surrounded by young tour guides who spoke rehearsed English and middle-aged Soviet officers who watched the Americans with calculating eyes. The HDM was displayed in a glass case. Case number 47, Brennan's survival pistol. The placard was in Russian and English both. High standard HDM, silent assassination weapon, Captured from American spy Nathaniel Brennan, 1960, evidence of CIA covert murder program. Mitchell stood before the case for a long time, long enough that one of the Soviet officers approached. "You are interested in this weapon, Colonel Mitchell?" Mitchell glanced at the man, perhaps 50 years old, stars on his shoulder boards indicating senior rank. "I am," Mitchell said. "You know of it?" "I know something about it, yes." The Soviet officer studied him. Something in Mitchell's tone had registered, a weight, a history. "The placard says this weapon was used for assassinations, that 47 Soviet citizens died from American silent weapons between 1945 and 1960. Is this true?" Mitchell looked back at the HDM behind glass, serial number just visible on the receiver, HDM-1847. He tried to remember if he had personally authorized that particular weapon's deployment. Probably. He had authorized all of them, in the end. "I don't know how many people died from weapons like this," Mitchell said quietly. "The operations were classified, many still are, but I can tell you why the weapon was created." The Soviet officer waited. Because American intelligence agents were dying. They were using inadequate weapons, making noise when they needed silence, getting killed in occupied cities because the enemy heard sounds that shouldn't have been there. This weapon, he gestured to the case, was designed to save their lives. By killing our people silently. By killing enemy combatants during wartime, yes. The Soviet officer's expression was unreadable. "Is there a difference?" Mitchell met his gaze. "Ask the men who came home to their families because this weapon worked. Ask them if there's a difference." They stood in silence, two old men from opposite sides of a war that had never formally ended, looking at a weapon that represented everything about that war that couldn't be spoken aloud. The officer nodded slowly. "Then we are not so different, Colonel." He walked away. Mitchell remained at the case, looking at HDM-1847, a weapon 39 years old, still preserved, still a testament to what desperate men could create when silence became more valuable than thunder. Present day, 2 museums, 2 stories. The Central Armed Forces Museum in Moscow still displays Brennan's HDM. The placard has been updated, less inflammatory now, more historical. American suppressed pistol circa 1943, captured during Cold War espionage operations. The Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas displays Admiral Harrison Whitfield's HDM, the weapon that had sparked a security breach, with a photograph. The placard reads, "High Standard HDM. Development of this suppressed pistol by OSS represented a breakthrough in covert operations capability during World War II. On a Thursday afternoon in autumn, an elderly man visits the Texas Museum. 92 years old, he walks with a cane. His grandson accompanies him. They stop at the HDM display. The old man stares at it for a long time. His grandson reads the placard aloud, then asks, "Did you ever see one of these, Grandpa?" "Yes, Korea. My unit had 2 of them. Never heard them fire, not once, but I know they saved lives because missions that should have failed didn't." "Did you ever use one?" A pause, long enough to contain decades. "That's classified, son." They move on. The HDM remains behind glass, silent even now. In Virginia, in a cemetery where autumn leaves drift across marble headstones, Colonel Henry Aldrich Mitchell was buried in 1989. He was 92 years old. The funeral was small. Family. A few old colleagues from the CIA who remembered when it was called something else. No mention was made of the HDM in his obituary. The weapon remained classified in certain details. But in a box of his personal effects, his daughter found a letter, written years earlier, addressed to no one, perhaps to history, perhaps to himself. The letter read, "I spent my career creating a weapon that let men kill without being heard. I am not proud of this. I am not ashamed of it. It was necessary work done in necessary times. The agents who carried the HDM into darkness came home because of it. That is what I choose to remember, not the deaths it caused, but the lives it saved. The silence it created was not the silence of death, it was the silence of survival. The letter was never published. It remains in family archives. Private, like so much of the work Mitchell did. The high-standard HDM served American intelligence for nearly 50 years. From 1943 to the early 1990s, the longest service life of any suppressed pistol in military history. Approximately 2,600 were produced. The exact number still in existence is classified. Modern suppressed pistols owe their existence to Dr. Edmund Hartwell's 1943 design. The integral suppressor architecture, the ported barrel, the two-chamber system, these principles remain standard. In telecommunications buildings across America, engineers still work on acoustic problems, sound transmission, noise reduction. They don't know that their predecessors once applied those same principles to making death silent. That knowledge remains in classified archives, in museums where elderly men stop and remember, in letters never published. The HDM spoke through silence. Some weapons win wars by making noise that shakes the earth. This one won by making no sound at all.